Hello and welcome to Grey Matters, the topical debate show designed to get your grey matter stimulated by tackling those issues which are never quite black and white. Today, drink driving. We're all aware of the risks. Every day, 8 people die on the roads in drink driving accidents. So why is it still happening? Despite rises in drink driving, the UK has one of the highest legal limits of alcohol allowed for drivers. But the rate of breath test is worryingly low. So, joining me to discuss this issue are Mel Hughes, who's Associate Director of the TTC Group, which provides training courses to rehabilitate convicted drunk drivers. Matthew Miller, who specialises in defending drivers facing motoring offence charges. Amanda Peake, the mother of 2 sons killed in a drink driving accident, who's also now an anti-drink driving campaigner. And Leela Clerk, Regional Secretary of the British Beer and Pub Association. Welcome, everyone. Now, before we open the discussion with our guests, let's take a look at this short film showing the devastating effects that drink driving can have.
I think I knew in myself that there was something not quite right because I couldn't settle. And usually I can just go back to sleep straight away. And then the phone went at 6:15 in the morning. You don't expect the phone to be ringing. And it was just one of the A&E nurses saying that there'd been an accident and can I come down to Stafford. We walked in and I hadn't even finished saying who I was, and the nurse said, "Can you come with us, just come into this room." Took us into a room and I said to Lisa, "Someone's dead. Something's bad's happened, someone's dead," because they don't put you in a room like this on your own. And when a consultant comes in and he's crying already before he's walked through the door, you definitely know something's not right. And he just said, 2 of the boys had died and they think it's Aaron and Ben. Would you hold my
It's supposed to be the children burying the parents, not the parents burying the children. So that's what's totally wrong, really, what's going on.
I'd want the law changed. We know that we've done this for them, for the boys, and nobody else is going to have to go through what we have to go through.
Well, Amanda, you said no one else should go through what you had to go through. The family is still obviously devastated. Your husband is still not able to return to work, am I right?
Yeah, that's right.
How soon did you find out about who caused it and what do you feel about that person? He's an ex-professional footballer, isn't he? I think it made national headlines at the time.
He was, yeah. I found out just after I'd identified my youngest son, Ben, that it was a drink driver. At that point, we didn't know it was a footballer. Aaron, at that point, was still on the motorway because he couldn't bring. They had to cut him out of the car, so he was still down there. They brought him back, asked me to go and identify him. So it was just as I come out of identifying Aaron, it was the liaison officer, Andy, said to me, I need you to sit down. I was like, why? What's wrong with Phil? First thing, I thought there was something wrong with Phil. He said, it's not Phil, but you're going to have to be prepared to have a lot of press interest in this case. So I said, well, why? I said, it's just an everyday, normal drink driver. They don't normally get as much press as what you're saying I'm going to get. He said, no, it was a professional footballer. And my heart sunk, and I just said, please tell me it wasn't a United player. Oh, I know that sounds really silly, but the whole family are all United fans, and I think it would have, even Aaron, I think it would have devastated us more that it was a United player than another team member. So he says, no, it was a footballer from Plymouth Argyle. He was coming back from Bolton and going home to Plymouth. I was like, well, that's not just a 5-minute drive. It's a good 4 or 5 hour drive.
Luke McCormick, wasn't it?
Yes.
Ex-Plymouth goalkeeper. Ex now, obviously, because he was eventually sentenced to 7 years and 4 months, I think it was, in jail. How do you feel about that sentence?
I think any parent that loses a child, or 2 children in this case, anyone will say the sentence isn't long enough and the sentence is never going to be long enough, no matter how long they got. But this sentence is an insult to the boys and to Phil. You know, he did injure Phil as well, and you know, he injured a couple of other people in the car as well. So June 2012, he's eligible for parole.
Can I turn to Matthew, our lawyer here from motoringoffencelawyers.com? Obviously, you try to defend people on motoring offences, obviously, hence the name. Drunk drivers too, obviously?
Yes, we do represent all.
Right.
People,
I mean, can I quote from your website, which says, Matthew Miller particularly likes to get his teeth into technical cases that can easily bamboozle the less well-informed. He's well known for sticking to his guns when all seems lost, and Matthew has saved the day for many a worried motorist. But really, can you hold your hands up and try and get somebody off on a technicality when clearly they are well over the limit?
Well, I think with any case where there's a fatality, it's very difficult to retain that professional focus that's required. I think what I'm referring to on the website is really the more minor road traffic offences as opposed to the drink driving offences, and certainly I would agree that to try and exploit a technicality in a case where 2 young boys have died would be beyond the pale, and I'd never condone any conduct of that nature.
But certainly other members of your profession, I won't say where people have died, but certainly will introduce technicalities, as it were, to try and get people off drink driving.
Well,
and we know
yes,
high-profile drink driving cases.
There is a statutory framework, Mike, and the statutory framework sets out the procedures that the police have to follow. We have a duty to our clients to do everything that we can to defend them, and very often that is simply a case of representing them on the basis of a guilty plea and trying to make sure that they get a fair sentence. It doesn't always mean that we're trying to exploit these loopholes.
Lee Leclerc, you represent British pubs, drinking, obviously. Where do you stand in terms of the actual limit? Because this guy, the professional footballer, was way over the limit, obviously. Where do you want to see the limit?
This was a terrible tragedy. Of course, it's it's very difficult to follow that. But I think we would say that the drink drive limit currently is about right. We can't really see the necessity for lowering it. Let me explain why. There's no evidence or even logic to suggest that somebody who currently goes out and drinks above the drink drive limit and then gets into a car, there's no evidence to suggest that if the limit was lowered, they would necessarily conform with the law. Instead, what a lowering of the limit would do, it would target, if you like, the more responsible driver, the driver that goes out at the moment and doesn't drink up to the limit or anywhere near the limit. But if the limit was lowered, they would adjust their behaviour.
Let's ask Amanda, who's had a personal experience of this, what you feel about Lee's view there.
No, I don't agree. Everybody's different in what alcohol they drink. I could drink more than you, and you're a bigger man, and I might not be over the limit. But the point is, if they lowered the limit, nobody knows where they stand. I have people telling me I can drink 2 pints before I'm over the limit, and that's legal. It's not legal because you shouldn't be drinking any alcohol before you get in your car. So it takes 12 hours for a pint of lager to come out of your system. So everybody knows if you've drank a pint of lager, you know you should not get in your car because any spot of alcohol affects your ability to drive, any.
So you're saying zero limit like in Sweden, I think?
Well, exactly. If it works in France, Ireland, Sweden, everywhere else, it should work in this country too.
Most countries in the EU, though, it's 50. It's set at 50. And indeed, that, I think, is the recommendation for us to go down from 80 to 50. Very few have zero. In fact, I think technically you can't actually have zero because of residual alcohol in the body. So,
well, and you have alcohol in mouthwashes and
Indeed.
in
Indeed.
things like that. But if we brought it down to 0.2, you know, at least it's low enough to people know, well, we can't have alcohol at all. There's no, ifs or buts about what they can have and what they, because there's a lot of people trying to say, well, I can have this and I can have that, and they can't.
You're right, Amanda, but who are you targeting there? You're targeting currently those people that are drinking below the limit.
Yeah, but then everybody will know then that they're not drinking. A lot of people will know that they can't get in the car in the morning because they've been drinking. It should be, you know, you shouldn't get in your car when you've had any alcohol at all, because
I think, yeah, we're sending out the wrong message here. We're sending out the completely wrong message. On one hand, we're saying don't drink and drive, and on the other hand, the legislation is saying, well, you can have up to 3 units in the case of a female and 5 units in the case of a male, and those levels of units will take us to the drink-drive limit. There is far too much medical evidence to show that even small amounts of alcohol can affect the brain.
Yeah.
Right? And there are areas of the brain we rely on, 7 areas that we rely on for safe driving. So once we've got alcohol in the system, our driving skills deteriorate rapidly. Obviously, the more alcohol we take on board, the worse our driving becomes.
Yes. And presumably, going back to Lee, a lower limit is going to, once again, perhaps we've seen a lot of pubs close in Britain in the last, what, 5-10 years, going to put a lot of your members out of business.
We have indeed. Can I just draw an analogy here with the speeding limit? If you are in a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit and you are doing 40 miles an hour, then you're breaking the law. You're driving irresponsibly. If you're doing 25 miles an hour, there is evidence to suggest that you are still quite dangerous. You could still kill somebody at 25 miles an hour, but you're being responsible. You're driving below the limit. And I think any change in the current limit is going to target those people who are currently drinking below the limit. Because if the people that are drinking above the limit, the drivers that are consuming higher than the limit,
but Lee,
they will ignore it, as they're ignoring it now.
That should be the limit, and this is our baseline on courses.
But that's not going to stop.
That should be the limit. If you're getting on board that 1.5 tons of metal, it's a 0 limit. You should not be drinking alcohol.
But the change of the law would not
because the evidence is, and let's talk risk factors.
Yes.
2.5 pints of ordinary strength beer or lager. So I'm talking only 3.5%. Okay. At the limit, to get to the limit for a male, we're talking 2.5 pints. So at the limit, with that amount of alcohol on board, the risk factor of being involved just in an accident is 2.5 times. Okay? At double the drink-drive limit, and believe me when I say this, we get lots of people on courses who are at least double the drink-drive limit and beyond.
Yes.
That risk factor,
yes,
it hikes up to 50 times
I'm sure it does.
The risk of being involved in not just an accident, but a fatal road traffic accident.
Can I ask Amanda, Luke McCormick, has he ever expressed any remorse to you? We're talking about rehabilitation, which you obviously deal with, Mel, but have you ever had any communication with him?
He did. He sent a letter last year before the anniversary, before the first anniversary of the boys dying. I think for my own benefit, I'd rather see him face to face.
So you want to see him face to face, and what would you say to him?
I've no idea.
If he was across this table now,
what the heck was you doing? You know, why? He was in a perfect good place where he was. He was in a hotel room. Why did he not stay in there instead of deciding I'm going to get up and go off? You know, it's ridiculous. And as for the responsible drinking part, don't get me wrong. I have a drink, but I do not get in my car in the morning. I point blank don't do it. I never have done. If I'd had a drink and I had to take the boys to school, I'd walk. You know,
let me ask the gentleman around the table then, and we know your view on that, but have you ever knowingly got into a car and realised you're over the limit and still driven the car?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say that I've driven a car whilst knowingly over the limit, but I think most people, if they're honest with themselves, have been in that situation where perhaps they've had a few drinks the night before and driven the car the next morning. As regards the issue of lowering the limit, if it can be established that lowering the legal limit will act as an effective deterrent to people and will lower the number of road deaths every year, then I don't think there's many people who would be against it. But the fact of the matter is that the evidence would suggest that actually that's not the case, and that the number of road deaths caused by people who are between 50 and 80 milligrams in blood is actually not that much over the number of road deaths as a whole in terms of the percentage. So there's a lack of evidence to suggest that actually bringing the lower limit in is going to reduce the number of road deaths overall.
But some would argue, and this is where we're coming from, that by lowering it to 50, you'll be saving somewhere in the region of 60, 65 lives a year on the road.
Yes.
That is the effect. The last time, I think Italy was the last EU country to bring down its level, because they originally were at 80 in blood like we are. And they had a similar, slightly less, but a similar figure over the subsequent 12 months. The number of saving deaths on the roads were about I think they were about 35-ish.
Yes.
So there is some evidence to show that by reducing it, it will save lives.
But it's impossible. It's impossible to say how many of those accidents would have been caused anyway without the presence of alcohol in those drivers' system.
But if they were drinking and they've caused the accident, so they've caused the accident, they were drinking. So.
But it's difficult to establish that causal link between the drinking and the accident
But
itself.
I think if you've got alcohol in the system, then
Yes.
your driving has got to be at very least suspect. At the
Yes.
very least, Matthew.
If you have had alcohol in your system, if you've got alcohol in your system, everything's changed. Your memory's different, your eyesight's different, your reactions are different. So they've caused the accident on purpose because they've got in their car. It's like going out with a loaded gun. You get in a car and you've had a drink, you're going out as a loaded gun. A car is a heck of a lot. It weighs tons. A little kid could just fly out into the road and still knock you out. So you could knock them over because your reactions are going to be a hell of a lot slower. But you don't get prosecuted in this. If you go into the police station and at the roadside you blow over and you go to red, you go into the police station, they put you on the bigger machine. If you blow to 39, you still get let off. I thought our legal limit was actually 35 micrograms.
Well, the reason for that is that one person's 39 is another person's 32 because everyone has a different ratio, blood pressure ratio.
The reason for this was an agreement that ACPO, the Association of Chief Police Officers, they signed up to an agreement a good number of years ago that although the limit was set at 35 in breath micrograms, if they blow under 40, so that's up to, as you said, 40, Amanda, up to and including 39, they will not be charged.
But breath doesn't always provide an accurate representation of the amount of alcohol in somebody's bloodstream, which ultimately is the real test of whether or not there's... So that's the reason why there is that.
I would disagree with
that.
That's
why they blow 2 and 3
Can I just break in here and ask Mel about the rehabilitation? When they come to you as drunk drivers, convicted drunk drivers, and you have the franchise, your license to actually rehabilitate these people, do you find there's genuine remorse, or is there some form of arrogance rather than the fact that, by God, I've had a few that night, that sort of thing?
It's surprising, Mike, when they do come to us, very quickly they become open books. They're really upfront with us. And there is one word that is we hear frequently on courses coming from these drivers, and that's the word shame. I've spoken to, for example, a woman who came on the course and she got her arm in some Velcro. And she wasn't driving, she told the family, because she'd sprained her wrist and she couldn't drive. I said, well, how long is this going to go on for? She said, well, I can manage it a bit longer, and it was coming up to Christmas.
This is just a ruse to cover...
Oh, yes, to cover the fact that she'd been disqualified. She couldn't drive the car because of this injury she'd done to her wrist. And I said, well, what's going to happen when you can't keep that up for much longer? She said, well, no, it's going to be my ankle next, and I'm going to put something on my ankle so that the family don't realise that I've got a drink drive. I've been disqualified for drink driving.
Can I ask Lee about the people who sell this stuff? Let's talk about books, because obviously you're all connected directly with that rather than supermarkets or whatever. But do you give pub landlords some indication, some training about how much you can sell?
Absolutely. And indeed, the drinks industry, the pub industry, has been right at the forefront of initiatives in this. We're often working, particularly at Christmas time, with drink drive campaigns and that sort of thing. I'll be Des, the designated driver scheme, was instituted by the industry, and this is something that we've supported for a long time. We have drivers' shelves in most pubs where often soft drinks, for example, will be sometimes free. It's entirely up to the licensee, but sometimes free, but certainly at a lower price. We'll even take keys off drivers if necessary. We'll have a designated driver campaign, as I mentioned earlier. So yes, the industry. But at the end of the day, it's personal responsibility, isn't it?
Okay, let's leave it there. Join us after the break, where we'll be continuing this debate on what can be done to tackle drink driving. Welcome back. Well, joining me on the panel, Mel Hughes, Associate Director of the TTC Group, Matthew Miller, who specialises in defending drivers facing motoring offence charges, Amanda Peake, mother of 2 young sons killed in a drink driving accident, and Lee Leclerc, Regional Secretary of the British Beer and Pub Association. So are people confused as to how much they can actually drink before they drive? Let's take a look at what the people of Manchester think about that one.
I think you could legally drink 3 pints before legally driving.
I think you can drink 1, maybe 2, but that's depending on how long you've drank it from since you've driven.
I think people should be allowed to drink minimum amounts. It should not be zero tolerance because everyone is different and they behave differently to their alcohol intake.
Probably around 3 to 4 for men, probably about 2 for women, because I think as long as you can walk and talk, I think it should be okay. Obviously at night, you'll be drinking probably at night, so less people on the road. Reaction speed needs to be not as good, so I reckon 3-4 pints would be fine.
I think it's about a pint before you're going to start driving that you can actually drink.
Having been convicted made me take a lot more care, and because of the costs involved for the insurance and etc. and getting my licence back, it was a lot of hassle.
Even when somebody had a drink in the night before, there could still be risk in the morning because the effect of the drink could stay within them.
I think you'd leave it if you've been on a night out about 24 hours before you started driving.
Again, I've heard that it takes an hour to burn off every unit, so base it on every, look back at what I drank, have an hour for every unit.
If I'd been out the night before driving, I think you'd leave about 12 hours before you're driving.
I think there should be a zero tolerance. In other words, if you're going to drive, no drinking at all.
I'd probably leave it a day. When I go out drinking, I come home, I'm usually passed out, on the bed for the next day, wake up 2 days later. So yeah, I think if you've been out on a proper night out, I think you shouldn't drive the next day, definitely.
Well, it's obvious there's a lot of confusion as to what the exact law is on how much you can drink before you can drive. Let's turn to a drink driving solicitor, if I can use that shorthand term, because Matthew, you represent people for all sorts of motoring offences, but drink driving is one of them. Let me put you on the hot spot. Let me say, if Luke, the former professional footballer, had come to you and said, I want you to represent me after this accident, how would you have taken him through it? And what would you have said to him?
I don't think there is anything that you can say to him. He's already aware of how much pain that he's caused to the family of those 2 little boys, and I don't think there's anything that a solicitor could say to make him realise that. But certainly, where there has been a fatality, the only advice would be that it would have to be that he pleads guilty at the earliest available opportunity.
So you'd say that, but you wouldn't look for any sort of technicalities, any problems with the road, any, a full stop left out of the charge sheet or whatever?
It's not so much the full stop left out of the charge sheet, Mike. What we look for is departures from the statutory procedures in terms of the taking of the samples, because the law has set out the set way that this should be done, and in certain circumstances we find that there have been departures from the procedure. There are certain things that the police have to do. They don't have unlimited powers. There are certain things that the police have to do in order to ensure that samples are admissible as evidence.
But you're looking for a loophole. What you're saying?
I would certainly wouldn't be looking for a loophole in a case involving those two little boys. I can assure you of that. There may be other lawyers that would.
But okay, if it was me on a drink driving charge, and let's say nobody's been actually hurt, but I've been stopped, I've been pulled up, I've gone across the curb or something like that. They've seen me. I want to I want to get off. To be honest, I don't want to lose my license. Are you going to look for a loophole? And what sort of loophole would you be looking for in that?
My duty as a solicitor is to go through the evidence, if I'm instructed to do so by my clients, to see if there is a potential defence. And I wouldn't be doing my job properly if I didn't do that. And as I say, the law is the law. The law says that the police must, for example, always give a warning of prosecution prior to asking for a breath sample. And if that warning it hasn't been given, then the sample isn't admissible at law, and I wouldn't be doing my job properly if I didn't flag up those sorts of issues.
But obviously you appreciate the police have got a very difficult job. Take a case, in Amanda's case, where everything must be happening all at once. It's a terrible tragedy. You know, somebody's bound to, or is likely to make a mistake. And then obviously the lawyers are trying to exploit that.
Well, I'd say in the more serious cases, it's even more important for the police to ensure that those procedures are correctly followed.
We've just seen the film there. Do you think that people know enough about the law? Is there enough education? Do we all know what the limit is, how much we can drink? We're going to talk in a minute about the morning after, for instance. Do you feel that there's enough education?
I don't think people do, no. I agree there should be more education. I don't think people are aware of how much alcohol they'd have to consume in order to be over the limit. And the difficulty is that, as already been alluded to, everyone's tolerance level is different.
I mentioned the morning after. If I could talk to Mel. Now, obviously, there's a problem here because you're still inebriated the morning after, or you still have got a certain amount in your system.
Yep. You're quite right, Mike, and people do not appreciate the amount of alcohol that can still be in the system the following morning. They go to bed, they have a sleep, they get up in the morning, have a little bit of breakfast, and they may feel okay. But they're still way over the limit. For example, I mean, we know this for a fact, that the morning after is a huge, huge problem. A couple of years ago, we looked at 4,000 of motorists that particular year we'd put through one of our courses, and we're doing over 10,000 a year at the present time. We looked at 4,000.
10,000 courses for drunk drivers?
10,000 people.
That's people, yes.
Over 10,000 motorists per year. That's just us.
And you're not the only company doing it?
We're not the only company doing it.
For drink driving?
For drink driving.
They've all been caught?
Yes.
That's ridiculous.
I was going to say it's a sobering thought.
It's over 10,000.
That's ridiculous.
And we looked at 4,000 a couple of years ago, and of those 4,000, the ones who were the morning after, to coin a phrase, 18.7% of those 4,000. So it's nearly 20%.
But does rehabilitation work? I mean, if we just had a ban, maybe a life ban, if it was a really serious situation, does rehabilitation work?
It is working nationally, and those are the only figures I can quote. Nationally, it's the reconvictions that are going down, because once they had this education, once they've been given the information, then they are far, far less likely to commit a further offence, because nationally the reconvictions have gone down by somewhere in the region of 54%, which has got to be good in anybody's language.
Okay, so
but it's it's where you commit the first time. There is insufficient government, no matter what colour the government is, there's insufficient information being pushed out to the motorist about units.
And what about the pubs and the brewers? Shouldn't they be putting some money into all this?
Well, we do. I mean, 1/3 of everything that turns over at a pub goes to the Treasury, so there's plenty of money going to the government from the pubs. I think just talking about we probably wouldn't all agree about the punishment for drink drivers, but it is actually quite harsh. I mean, if drink driving was penalised by an £80 fixed penalty, there'd be a lot more drink driving going on in this country. There's no question about that. The punishments is harsh, and there's also non-legislative punishments as well, such as, for example, losing a job because you rely on your car to drive. You lose your job, and if you lose your job, you could lose your home and subsequently your family.
Perhaps you don't think about this if we were all round a table in the pub having a great night. Perhaps you don't think about that.
Well, people should think about it. I mean, you know, there's some, clearly on that VT, there was an awful lot of irresponsible quotes coming from some of those individuals. And Mel is right. I mean, there does clearly need to be some more training. I think we shouldn't be doing it really around units, because the problem with doing it around units is then people make a calculation. I'm against intoximeters or whatever they're called, you know, for testing yourself to see if you're fit to drive. If you've reached that stage, you shouldn't be getting in the car. No question about that at all. If I can just say, one of the biggest issues is the likelihood of being caught. And there's a very interesting statistic. If you were in France, 63% of all French drivers will have been breathalyzed in the last 3 years. In Holland, that goes up to 64%. In Britain, it's 9%.
Well, I'm right in saying that we don't just have random breath tests, do we?
No, we don't.
Those are not
You
legal.
have a reason to
That
pull
is-
you
that
over
is-
to
that
give
is-
you a
I have to
breath
correct
test.
you there. They don't have to have a reason
To
to
pull
pull
you
you
over.
over,
No.
but they do have to have a reasonable suspicion in order to breathalyse you.
We would like to
There are
see
three
random
reasons
test.
for a breath test. You've been involved in a road traffic accident, you committed what's called a moving traffic offence, or the police suspect you of having alcohol in the system. And just a simple, what's called a stop check.
Yes.
Just to see whether, because the police can do that with anybody,
Yes.
if they're driving down the road, they can stop the driver just to check whether they and the vehicle are complying with legislation. And it's when that conversation starts,
You can smell the alcohol.
suspicion of alcohol because it's on the breath.
And what about the statistics on the continent? If you were saying that, let's call them random tests, are much more prevalent in
well, they have different sanctions as well. Some of them are quite light, and they also have varying degrees of sanctions. In other words, if you're a bit over the limit, you have a light fine, and if you're a bit more, you have a slightly heavier fine. I don't think we'd like to see that in this country.
Perhaps the answer is to do away with mandatory disqualification for those people who are caught between 50 and 80, but still make it against the law.
Or have
that may well be
disqualification of 3 or 6 months, Matthew.
Yes, or shorter, because at the moment
keep the 12 months for over 80.
Yes, in my experience, most of our clients are significantly over the limit anyway. And lowering the legal limit is not going to deter those sorts of people.
But then they'll know that they shouldn't be getting. See, the law's so upsy daisy that they shouldn't get in the car.
That if I'm a soap star and I get done for drink driving tonight, and I've got quite a bit of money, I've got a better chance of perhaps escaping a ban than Joe Soap from the back streets of Salford.
Yeah, you will.
You're saying
you will. The footballers
Let's
do it
ask
as
a lawyer
well.
on this one.
They do, because
If
they've
I'm
got more
prepared to
money.
pay a high-powered lawyer to get to at least find a technicality, I've got a better chance of getting off, haven't I?
The better your lawyer, the better your chance that you've got. Yes, and I have to agree with that.
So that's true. So there's not really a consistency in this sort of
There's
thing.
no, there isn't. If you're a footballer or you're a star, they'd find some way of getting you off. If you're just an everyday Joe Blog, you'll get the sentence that you deserve.
What was your attitude to drink driving before this terrible tragedy happened to your family? Did you ever think about it?
No, I didn't. I didn't really think about it because, as I said, I worked in a bar, so I didn't drink and drive myself because obviously I worked in it 90% of the time. By the time you finish a shift, you'd want to just get home and get to your bed. You don't want to drink. Plenty of times I've taken a key off somebody, or I have picked up the phone because I've seen them walking into the car park and have said, look, this is the registration number, this is the person, his name's like that, he's been in here, or she's been in here for 5-6 hours, she's the way over, they can hardly walk and they're about to get in the car. But you can't do that with every customer, and landlords, landladies, the barmen, bar women, you can't expect them to do that all the time. It is the individual that is responsible for your own actions. You are responsible for your own actions. So if you're stupid enough to get in your car, then you should be held responsible for the actions that you've just caused.
Can I pick up on one point?
Yes, indeed.
On the clip, Mike, one guy said he was aware that the body gets rid of the alcohol at rate of 1 unit per hour. That's fine, and yes, if everything's working as it should be, because what we're told by the medical profession is, and they're looking at the average, say the average male, 28 years of age, 5'10", about 10.5 stone, good healthy lifestyle, good healthy diet, and a good healthy working liver. But there aren't many of those animals around, are there, really?
No, you're certainly not looking at one at the moment.
But on top of all this, that's fine, providing we don't have any obstruction in here. And this is one of the biggest myths surrounding alcohol, and that is food. You hear so many times people saying, I'll be okay because I've had a big meal. It will soak it up. It slows down the elimination out of the body, so you can forget your 1 unit an hour.
Right. Let me just go around the table then as to the solution to this. I'm sure you haven't got the absolute answer, but certainly if I had to ask you, put you on the spot, and I'll start with you, Mel, very, very quickly. How would you cut the rate of drink driving?
I think it's important, down one or two different avenues, really. Get more information, important, vital, pretty basic information out to the motorists on a regular basis.
How about starting younger as well, about in schools, for instance?
Well, that sort of information, yes, if we can get into these places. I mean, I personally have been into sixth form colleges, but I find talking to motorists, either with a full licence or certainly with a provisional licence. So that's why we think it's probably the 15-year-old stage before they're able to get a licence, because A, they're our future drivers, B, to let them know what they're doing to themselves physically, to the body, with drinking the amounts of alcohol that they're drinking.
I'm going to turn to Matthew. Bigger penalties, more education, what do you think?
Well, certainly more education, and I would consider lowering the legal limit, but also bringing in a power of discretionary disqualification and penalty points for those people who are slightly below the current limit, but nonetheless over 50 milligrams in blood.
And from behind the bar, Lee Clerk?
Education, certainly. Random testing. Much more random testing. Let's get out there, let's get the police out there on the roads and stopping these people and checking them.
And Amanda is the only person who's been directly involved in a tragedy like this. What do you think?
Lower the limit. More education. People do need it. And as the random testing, because I've done things with the police as well, they don't have enough sources to do random testing. So maybe they could have just one officer with a normal person, everyday person, or get some of these PCOs, let them have a little bit more authority to pull somebody over and say, come on, you know, we're testing you for drink driving. Give some of the PCOs a little bit more. They've got plenty of them out there. There's plenty of them, but no authority to do anything because they can't even arrest somebody. They have to get another officer in. Let them do a little bit more.
And the cost to the country must run into millions for every accident. Even your accident, as you know, on the M6,
it would cost them thousands,
hundreds of thousands.
Of course it did, because they closed that road off. I think they closed that road, their motorway off the whole day, and then obviously they had to close it off again when they had to do the reconstruction. So it's a lot of money, and you know, then you got the ambulances and the fire brigade and everybody else.
Because the clip that we show them on a course, one of many clips that we have, and it's James Bowen from the BBC. It's a BBC educational film, and that particular year they were looking at these were NHS figures, 6 billion out of the NHS budget for these sorts of alcohol-related issues. The costings were horrendous.
But from your point of view, on the other side of the bar, if you like, the clerk, obviously Amanda would like to see a zero limit. It's not going to do your members any good, is it?
No, it wouldn't, but I get back to my original point. We're not convinced that a lowering of the limit is going to target the real culprits, the culprits that we've spoken about, those that are drinking now and completely ignoring drink drive laws and are going out there and getting drunk and getting in cars. They're the people we've got to tackle.
If I could just ask you this one, Amanda, how would you like your two children to be remembered? Because you are now an anti-drink drive campaigner. Is this your way of perpetuating their memory, really, and making sure they didn't die in vain?
Yeah, Luke McCormick got banned for 4 years. Bear in mind, he's got a sentence. He'd be eligible for parole in 3.5, but his ban started the day he went into prison. Now, it shouldn't be like that. It should start the day they leave prison and have the 4-year ban. I'm not too sure if that
hasn't changed yet. It is being, I understand it is being looked at.
It should
but at the present
like
time, your disqualification starts at the day of sentence.
Because how much driving they're going to do in prison? unless they're miracle workers and they get a car and start driving around in a prison cell. But, you know, they can't do that. It should be the ban from the day they leave the prison, because they've got to learn that they can't do this. Fair enough, they've been in prison, but who's to say the day they come out that they're not going to get in the car and do it again?
And presumably you're going to carry on your anti-drink driving work
of course
now.
I will.
Well, we're going to wish you all the best for the future in that work. I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. For now, I'd like to thank all my guests, Mel Hughes, Matthew Miller, Amanda Peake and Lee Leclerc. And so we've seen Amanda's story and know the potential damage that can be done. So remember, the only way you're going to know you're not over the limit is by not drinking at all.